Hello everyone. I wish you all a good evening enjoying a good ghost story with the gentle sound of rain from BLACKRIDGE Stories and a peaceful and good night's sleep. I still remember clearly the first day we set foot on Blackwood Farm, a place that seemed peaceful but concealed things that none of us could have expected. At that time, I simply thought I was searching for tranquility, a place away from the noisy city, the smog, and the invisible burdens that modern life piles upon us. I was a semi-professional photographer, always longing to live in nature, surrounded by raw, untouched landscapes to reignite the inspiration that had faded after years of struggling in the cramped urban environment. And then, Blackwood Farm appeared on the real estate list like a miracle. It was an old farm, located in an isolated area in the central part of the United States, nearly forgotten, surrounded by dense forest, with hills rolling gently behind, stretching to the horizon. The only road leading to Blackwood Farm was a dusty, desolate path, rarely traveled. Even the GPS sometimes became useless here. But for me, that was perfect. A place cut off from the world. No neighbors, no honking cars, no social media. Just me, my partner, and the wild nature around us. Perfect for photography. Perfect to start anew. The main house was an old wooden structure, built in the late 19th century. It looked like it came out of an old cowboy movie. A sloped roof, gray wooden walls, small square windows, and a long porch in front with rotting wooden columns. Behind it was a derelict barn, a small animal shed, and an ancient well that no longer worked. The land here was vast, over 30 acres, enough for farming, livestock, or simply existing. The first days at Blackwood Farm weren't bad at all. We spent time cleaning, dusting, and fixing the squeaky doors and the creaky floorboards. During the day, sunlight filtered through the tree branches, casting beautiful rays of light. Every morning, I would wake up, walk out onto the porch with my camera, inhale deeply the smells of earth, wet grass, and rotting wood. The sound of forest birds chirping replaced the alarm clock. At night, the sky was full of stars, silent as a sheet, a tranquility that the city had never given me. But then, somewhere along the way, we began to feel something was wrong. It wasn't specific. There were no clear events, no screams in the night, no one knocking on the door, no blood, just a feeling of being watched, a sensation as if someone, or something, was always standing just a few steps behind you, though when you turned around, there was no one there. One afternoon, when I was taking photos in the forest behind the house, I had the feeling I was not alone. The sound of the wind whistling through the leaves, footsteps on dry leaves. At first, I thought it was a deer or a squirrel. But then I stood still, and all the sounds stopped. The forest was eerily silent. I began having nightmares, strange dreams, where I could only see a shadow moving, scratching at a door, voices calling my name echoing in my head. I would often wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, feeling as though someone had just been standing next to my bed. But when I opened my eyes, the room was only filled with the faint moonlight filtering through the dusty window. My partner was no better. She often said the house made strange noises in the early morning, whispers, as if someone was talking in the basement. Once, she swore she saw a figure standing quietly outside the bedroom window, but when she ran to check, there was nothing. Yet, the footprints on the wet ground were still there, leading from the forest right up to the front steps. We started asking questions. What exactly is Blackwood Farm? Why had it been abandoned for so many years? Why did the previous owners leave in such a hurry, leaving behind only a crude map and some smeared handwritten notes? I went to the local library, a 40-minute drive from the farm, to research the history of the land. And what I found sent a chill down my spine. Blackwood Farm had a darker history than I imagined. The farm once belonged to the McAllister family, a wealthy and eccentric family from the late 19th century. They lived isolated from the world, not socializing with anyone. There were many rumors that they practiced ancient rituals involving blood sacrifices and soul summoning. Some old newspapers mentioned that in 1903, the entire McAllister family, 7 people, vanished without a trace. The police found no bodies, no signs of struggle, and no one knew what had happened. Since then, the farm had been abandoned. Those who tried to live there didn't last more than a few months. I remember laughing at that time. Part of me thought it was just a legend, a story embellished over the years. But another part, I couldn't deny that I felt something real, something cold, existing within the walls of that old house. I set up security cameras around the house, one on the back porch, one in the hallway, one at the basement door, the place where my partner said she had heard noises. Then, just a few nights later, I discovered footage that was impossible to explain. The camera on the back porch, at around 3:17 a.m., recorded the back door opening, even though I was sure I had locked it tightly before going to sleep. A faint shadow, or something, entered the frame, its face unclear, its shape indistinct, just a dark mass moving as if floating. It stood there for a while, then vanished as if it had never existed. The camera didn't capture it leaving. The motion sensor didn't trigger. There was no wind, no animals, just presence. I began to doubt myself. Was I just overly tired? Had my obsession caused me to create all of this? But then my partner began showing strange signs. She droned a lot, often mumbling words I had never heard before, as if speaking an ancient language. Once, I saw her standing in front of the mirror in the middle of the night, completely still, as if hypnotized. When I called her, she didn't respond. When she finally came to, she remembered nothing. We tried to leave. We truly did. But every time we tried to pack up, something happened. The car wouldn't start. The phone lost signal, or a small accident would force us to delay. It was as if someone or something was trying to keep us there. From a peaceful farm, Blackwood Farm gradually turned into a nightmare, and I knew somehow it was alive. It could feel us. It was watching us, and perhaps it was waiting for something. After countless sleepless nights and a series of inexplicable events at Blackwood Farm, I became almost certain of one thing. This place was not just an old house with a few ghost stories. It was a doorway, or worse, a kind of invisible prison holding something ancient and malevolent. Yet, at the time, I still didn't fully understand the gravity of what we had unknowingly stirred up. Everything started with an ancient amulet. One late autumn afternoon, I decided to head behind the old barn to take a few sunset photos. The light filtered through the trees, stretching across the ground covered with yellow leaves, creating a perfect scene. But as I approached an old maple tree next to the abandoned well, my foot tripped over something hard and sharp. I knelt down, brushed away the leaves and damp earth, and saw a dark metal object half buried in the ground. It was a round amulet made of copper, coated with a layer of greenish-brown rust, and carved with strange symbols. Symbols from no language I had ever known. In the center was a single eye, as though it was staring directly into my soul. When I touched it, I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. My heart raced. A part of me urged to put it back where I found it, but my curiosity won. I took it inside, cleaned it off, and placed it on my desk in the living room. That night, I couldn't sleep. In my subconscious, I heard whispers, distinct, clear, yet not in any human language. It was as though someone was chanting. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but over several consecutive nights, the whispers grew clearer, closer, echoing in my head. I began to experience hallucinations. When I looked in the mirror, sometimes my eyes seemed to turn pitch black, like bottomless pits. Walking down the hall, I caught glimpses of dark figures, flashing just out of my sight. My partner said I was changing. My voice became deeper, my gaze distant, plagued by insomnia, and I would often stand still for hours, just staring at the amulet. She begged me to throw it away, but I couldn't. It felt like it was attached to me, like a part of me. One night, I woke up at 3 a.m. cold, drenched in sweat. On the ceiling were numerous scratch marks, like the claws of some creature. The whispers no longer stayed in my mind. They filled the house, blending with the wind's howls. I rushed to the living room. The amulet was no longer on the desk. I searched frantically. Finally, I found it underneath the bed, right where I had placed my feet down earlier that morning. I decided to bury it again. My rational mind, though growing weaker, Still had enough sense to know that this thing did not belong in our world. I took it back to the old maple tree, dug a deep hole, and buried it. As my hand covered it with dirt, I swear I heard a faint hiss, like a sound of resistance, coming from the earth. I thought I had done the right thing. But no, that very night, the whispers grew even louder. It wasn't just strange noises in the dead of night anymore. It echoed even during the day. Inside the house, outside in the yard, in the bathroom, at the dinner table. The voice followed me like a breath. Wherever I went, it went. I was startled by the sound of someone calling my name from right behind me. Even though no one was there, I heard the sound of children's laughter echoing from the pitch-black basement. But no child had ever lived here. I felt like my mind was being torn apart. I decided to leave the farm. I told my partner pack up. This time, we had to leave, no matter what. We drove through the night, non-stop, no turning back. I just wanted to get as far from Blackwood Farm as possible. But the whispers didn't stay behind. It followed me, even though we were over 300 miles away, in a hotel in a different city. I could still hear the voices in my head. When I closed my eyes, they whispered more clearly, closer, as if they were speaking directly into my brain. A friend of mine introduced me to an expert in paranormal phenomena. He looked at me for just a moment and then said, "You've awakened an ancient entity, and when you buried it, you didn't destroy it. You only returned it to the earth, but it chose you, and now it lives inside you." I laughed bitterly, thinking it was madness. But then, I started hearing my voice change. Sometimes, while talking, a different tone would slip in. A hoarse, unnatural voice. My partner began to grow afraid. She wanted to leave me. She wanted to run. But I was no longer myself to let her run. One morning, I woke up to find myself back in the middle of Blackwood Farm. I don't remember how I got back. The car was gone. The phone was dead. And the amulet, the one I had buried, was right outside the door, clean and shining as if brand new. I realized I could never leave. Not again. A part of me belonged to this place now. A part of me had been claimed. The whispers, now, were no longer foreign. They made sense. They spoke of a return, of a ritual, of a root spirit rising from the earth. And I, the one who had awakened it, must be the one to complete the ritual. I don't know how much longer I'll remain myself, but if you're watching or listening to this recording, please, do not seek out Blackwood Farm. Do not search for the amulet. Do not listen to the whispers. And most importantly, never believe that you can escape. I once thought the whispers were the worst thing Blackwood Farm had to offer, but I was wrong. They were merely the first invitation, the opening sound of a dark symphony that had yet to fully play. And in the cold heart of this house, something had been waiting for a very long time, just to hear that music again. It all began on a gloomy afternoon when I stumbled upon an old music box in the attic. The attic had always been locked, but that afternoon, the rotting wooden door swung open as if inviting me in. I climbed up, dust swirling around, the air thick with the smell of damp wood and thyme. In the darkest corner, under a thick layer of dust-covered red velvet, was a black ebony music box, intricately carved with vine-like patterns wrapping around distorted faces. As I blew the dust away and lightly touched the wooden surface, I distinctly felt a cold shiver run down my spine. Though every instinct screamed at me to leave it alone, curiosity, or something deeper, compelled me to wind the brass key. A soft click echoed, and then the music began. The sound of the music box filled the attic, soft, intermittent, like the breath of a sick child. The melody was unlike any classical tune I had ever heard. It trembled, offbeat, as though it was trying to remember itself after centuries of slumber. And then, just as the song seemed about to reach its conclusion, it stopped abruptly. No sound, not a final lingering note. The room sank into an absolute silence, a silence so thick it could drive you mad. I turned, and that was when I saw it. A shadow. In the corner of the living room, by the rocking chair near the window, a figure sat silently, its back turned toward me. The fading light of the afternoon filtered through the window, revealing only vague outlines, messy hair, bony shoulders, and skeletal hands resting on the chair's armrests. The rocking chair moved slowly, as if in rhythm with a melody no one could hear but it. I froze, unable to breathe, unable to move. I don't know how long I stood there, but when I tried to step closer, that figure vanished in an instant, as if it had never been there. No sound, no cold breath. Only the chair rocking gently for a few more beats, then stillness. I brought the music box downstairs, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. I examined it repeatedly, but every time I wound it, it always stopped at the same point, midway, as though something was blocking it. Not a mechanical fault. I knew better. I had repaired old cameras. A simple mechanism like this couldn't malfunction that way. That night, I left the music box on the bedside table. My biggest mistake. At 2:17 a.m., I woke up, not because of the music box, but because of the feeling that someone was watching me. The room was pitch black, but I could feel the gaze piercing me from the far side of the bed. I dared not move, dared not lift my head from the pillow. Then, the music began to play, on its own. No one wounded, but the music played softly, lingering longer than usual, trembling, drawing closer. I glanced, and I saw it, on the rocking chair at the far side of the bedroom. There it was again, but this time it faced me. I couldn't make out its face, only a mass of blackness, as though the face did not exist in the realm of light. But I saw the eyes, not human eyes, not reflective, not alive, just two empty holes, like two passages leading into a bottomless abyss, staring straight through me, past my skin, bones, and into the farthest recesses of my memories. I screamed. The lights flickered on. My partner rushed in. The shadow vanished. The music box sat motionless on the table, as if no sound had ever escaped it. But from that night on, I saw it every night. The shadow, sitting on the chair, silent, still, only listening to the music, then vanishing when the unfinished song ended. I tried to destroy the box. I smashed it with a hammer. I burned it with fire, but nothing could break it. No matter how far I threw it, by morning, it always returned to my bedside table, still intact, covered in a thin layer of dust, as though it had just been found from the past. I began losing control. No sleep, no food. My eyes were sunken, my lips cracked, my hands trembling as the afternoon light faded. Then I discovered something far more terrifying. I took the melody from the box to a classical musician. He listened to the recording, then turned pale, stood up, and walked away without a word. A week later, I received a handwritten letter from him. You should not listen to that tune again. It is not music. It is a summoning frequency. This melody once appeared in an ancient ritual of tribes long extinct, used to call forth something they referred to as the Dreamkeeper. It has no form, no name. It only appears when the music plays, but is never allowed to finish. The unfinished is the invitation, and when the invitation is repeated enough times, it will never leave. I trembled. I had accidentally played that tune too many times. Not just summoned it once, but over and over, over and over. My partner left me in fear. She said I whispered in my sleep, in a strange language, calling out a name that couldn't be spoken, and sometimes talking to the empty chair in the room. As for me, I grew accustomed to the shadow's presence. It was no longer as terrifying as before. At times, I even felt comforted by its presence. When the melody played, I felt lighter, as though my memories melted away, as though all the pain was swept away. But I knew clearly, the price was drawing near, because last night, the chair was no longer empty when the music stopped, and the shadow was still sitting there. It didn't disappear anymore. It stayed. I am the only night watchman still remaining at the Hartwick Hotel, an old building located on an isolated hill, which once served as the heart of a prosperous small town at the beginning of the last century. Now it is nothing but a shadow of its former glory, keeping only the faded paint and dusty long hallways. I took this job one cold autumn night, thinking I would be alone with a flashlight and old novels, but I was wrong. From the very first nights, I felt as though the hotel was breathing. The doors would open and close by themselves. The wooden floors creaked as if someone were walking behind me, though the hallways were empty. But what sent shivers down my spine the most was the sound of an old saxophone, rising from the second floor at exactly 3 a.m. every night. It wasn't the kind of sound you expect from an abandoned hotel. No speakers, no one playing, just a haunting melody that seemed to come from the depths of the earth. I used to think I was imagining it, until I started finding playing cards scattered around, sometimes on the front desk, sometimes in the elevator, or even under the pillow in the break room. It was always the same deck, always with the same jack of clubs appearing. No one knew where they came from. At first, I picked them up, thinking it was some weird prank. But the next morning, they would be there again. The card this time singed at the edge, as though someone had thrown it into a fire and regretted it. I told the story to the hotel's former manager, an old man who had retired and lived a few miles away. When I mentioned the music and the cards, he fell silent for a long while before telling me, "You hear the saxophone, and the card, good God, he may still be here." Who was he? He told me about a notorious gambler who used to live there in the 1920s. His name was Silas Red Jab Mallory, a man who always wore a red suit and played the saxophone in the hotel bar after each big win. He was famous for his luck, or for cheating, and died mysteriously after being accused of cheating in a high-stakes game. People said he was shot dead in room 307, the very room I still check every night, but his body was never found. No one really knew what happened to Red Jack. I started paying more attention to room 307 after that. During the day, it was quiet, empty, just the light filtering through the window onto the dusty old bed. But every night, right when the music began, the doorknob of the room would click, as though someone was trying to open it from the inside. And if you were quiet, truly quiet, you could hear the saxophone playing. Not a joyful tune, but a dragging, elongated, dark sound, like a call from beyond the grave. I decided to set up a camera that night. I wanted proof, not for anyone else, but for myself, to know I wasn't going crazy. But the video only showed one strange thing. At the moment the music played, time seemed to slow down. Everything around me froze, and a dark figure began to form in the mirror in the room. A man with a saxophone in his hand, his red eyes glowing in the dim light. From that night, the phenomena repeated with more intensity. I saw Red Jack, or something wearing his skin, appearing at the bar, standing behind the mirror, in the elevator. Always the same eyes, the same saxophone, and that twisted smile that never reached the eyes. I tried leaving the hotel. I stayed away for 3 days, thinking I could escape the loop. But on the third night, while I was sleeping at my apartment 20 miles away, the music still echoed from the living room. And on the table, a singed jack of clubs, as if welcoming me back. I couldn't escape. Red Jack didn't just haunt the hotel. He haunted me. I started researching. I dug through old documents, read newspapers from the 1920s, and asked the old townsfolk. Some said Red Jack was a bootlegger during Prohibition, using the hotel as a front for his operations. Others said he was a sorcerer, playing the saxophone as a ritual to summon spirits. But one thing was certain, his death, whether by bullet, fire, or magic, didn't end him. An old woman who lived at the edge of town gave me an old, worn leather notebook. "I did an exorcism there once," she whispered, as if afraid he could hear. But it wasn't enough. His soul is bound by music and blood. To free him, you must play the final song, the one he never finished. I found the old saxophone in the hotel's wine cellar. No one knew it was there. The name Red Jack was engraved on the side. I knew I had to finish the song. It was the only way to break the connection. But music wasn't my strength. I practiced every night in room 307, surrounded by darkness, with the sighs from the walls that seemed to breathe. And one night, I played the last note. When the sound rang out, right complete, the dark figure in the mirror shattered. The wind howled through the hallways, making the lights flicker like a racing heartbeat. And then, everything fell into silence. The next morning, the hotel was eerily quiet. No music, no cards. I opened the door to room 307 and found nothing but dust. Red Jack, it seemed, had gone. I still worked there, but now I know. Some ghosts don't need blood to exist. They live on memories, on unfinished music, on the fear of being forgotten. And when night falls, sometimes I still hear a faint melody, as if Red Jack only paused, never truly disappeared. I don't know why I agreed to bring it home. The statue was found in an abandoned warehouse behind the woods, near the outskirts of town, where an old nursing home had been closed down in the 1970s. I had only joined a local archaeology group to take photos for a magazine. A simple, quick task. But when I saw it, I couldn't take my eyes off. The statue was barely a meter tall, made of gray stone covered in dust, depicting a woman sitting with her knees pulled up, her hands clutching her head, her face hidden by hair and shadows. It wasn't like any artwork I had ever seen. Not because of its beauty, it wasn't beautiful, but because of the feeling it emanated. Something heavy, like it was silently screaming. The team leader wanted to leave it behind, saying it didn't belong to any period they were studying. But I, foolish and curious, suggested bringing it back to my studio. I told them I would take care of it, photograph it, and return it in a few days. No one objected, but the way they looked at me that day, I can't forget it. The first night, I placed it in my office, facing my desk. I remember feeling cold despite the heater running. When I turned off the lights, I turned back to look at it, and I swear the statue's head had tilted slightly towards me. I tried to brush it off. It was strange, but I'm an adult, I'm rational. I went to sleep. I dreamed of an empty room, covered in dust with soft yellow light. In the room, there was the sound of heavy breathing. Someone was crying. I couldn't pinpoint where the sound was coming from. Then I saw the statue, but this time, it wasn't sitting. It was standing. Its hands were still clutching its head, but its face was no longer hidden. I don't clearly remember what its face looked like, but when I woke up, I was drenched in sweat, and my throat felt like I had been screaming all night. The next day, I took some photos, then planned to move the statue to the basement for a few days. But when I picked it up, I felt a chill run from my hands up to my shoulders. A sudden headache hit me. I dropped it, almost dropping the statue. I had to ask my neighbor Lucas to help carry it downstairs. He joked, "It's as heavy as carrying hell on your shoulders," then laughed. But after leaving my house that day, Lucas started avoiding me. A few times I saw him from a distance, his eyes avoiding mine, and once I heard him tell someone, "That house, there's something wrong with it." Since the statue was moved to the basement, strange things started happening. At first, it was sounds. A light tapping at 3 a.m., the sound of footsteps moving around the house. But when I got up to check, there was nothing. Then it was the feeling, like someone was standing behind me, staring as I brushed my teeth, like someone was hiding on the stairs, just waiting for me to turn around and see. I began losing sleep, and then came the scratches. First on my arm, 3 long marks, faint as if made by fingernails. I thought I scratched myself in my sleep, but then one day, I found a scratch running from my neck down to my chest, deep, clear, and red. I went to the doctor, and he said I was stressed, that I was harming myself without realizing it. I believed him. I wanted to believe. But then, I decided to install security cameras around the house. At night, when I couldn't sleep, I would play back the footage to reassure myself that nothing unusual was happening. The first night, nothing. The second night, I saw my own shadow walking in the kitchen at 2 a.m., though I remembered I hadn't left my bed. On the third night, I saw another shadow. Not mine. Shorter. Standing in the corner of the living room, unmoving. I moved out of the house that day. I rented a small room outside town, but the fear didn't subside. I still dreamed. I still heard the heavy breathing, and this time I began to see it when I was awake. The silhouette of a woman, head lowered, standing in the corner of the room, even though I knew I was somewhere else, far away from that house. I hired an exorcist, an old Mexican man from a distant town. He only needed to look at the statue through a photo before he grimaced. "This isn't just haunted," he said. "It's a lock. It's holding something, and whoever wakes it will be bound to it." We returned to the house, bringing incense, salt, holy water, and all the rituals I could afford. The old man chanted in the basement for hours. When he came up, he said, "I've locked it away. but you must live as if it's still here, because it remembers you now. I placed the statue in a thick wooden box, wrapped in salt and sacred cloth, and locked it in a metal cupboard. I moved back into the house, living quietly, never inviting anyone over. I never turned on the basement light. I never went down there alone. And I started writing, because I needed to keep my mind occupied. I needed to leave the story behind, in case I disappear. But some nights, I hear crying from beneath the floor. Sometimes I see the basement door handle turn slightly, and every time I stand near it, I feel like someone is watching me from inside, not with eyes, but with memory, like I've become a part of it, and it a part of me. I don't know how much longer I can hold on, but if you're reading this, never touch something you don't understand. Don't stare too long into the darkness, because sometimes the thing in the darkness is staring back at you. And if you hear someone crying in the silence of your house, remember, it might not be someone else you're hearing. It might be the fear inside you, crying out. I have lived with the obsession for weeks now, ever since the statue was locked away in the basement of the house. Although it has been securely sealed with cement, chains, and the charms I placed according to the instructions in old books, I can't feel at ease. Every night, I wake up in the thick fog of my mind, cold sweat dripping down my neck, and at times, I realize I am standing in the living room without remembering how I got out of bed. Then the neighbors started talking about me. Mr. Mertens, who lives about half a mile from my house, said he saw me standing in the backyard at 3 a.m., holding something resembling a small knife, drawing strange symbols on the ground with white powder. I don't remember any of this, but the next morning, I actually discovered the chalk marks under the fence, circles surrounding symbols that looked like human eyes. I started keeping a sleep journal, setting up a camera in front of my room's door and an alarm every 2 hours to check if I had moved. Yet, what I found only deepened my anxiety. There were parts of the footage showing me standing still in the dark, staring directly into the camera, as though I knew I was being watched. Once I smiled, a smile that, when I watched it again, I didn't recognize as my own. I no longer believed I was alone in this body. That's why I decided to perform an exorcism, an ancient ritual found in a book eaten by termites that I bought from an old bookstore. Inside was a sealing ritual using white powder, sea salt, and fire. It may sound superstitious, but I had reached the point where I accepted the irrational. I drew a salt circle around myself in the attic, where I had heard footsteps at night, though no one else lived with me. Along the circle's diameter, I scattered charcoal powder from the piece of the statue I had once shattered, then wrote ancient symbols, a language whose origin I did not know but found in the book, though I had never studied it. When the candle was lit, a cold breath spread from the walls, as if the air in the room had been replaced by something else, heavy, hissing softly. I closed my eyes and began chanting the words, but my throat was dry, my tongue numb, and the wind began to whisper around me. The voices, they didn't come from the outside, but echoed in my mind. They were unclear but insistent, as though urging me to open the door and step out of the salt circle. I held firm, at least, I thought I did, and continued chanting. But as the final words echoed, the candle flickered and then went out completely. The room was plunged into darkness, silence. Then the creaking noises began, from the stairs leading down to the ground floor. There was no one. I live alone. I tried not to move, staying inside the salt circle, my heart pounding like a drum. But the attic door began to shake slightly, then slowly opened, though I was sure I had locked it tightly. In the narrow gap of the door was a shadow, no clear shape, but I could feel it staring at me, not with eyes, but with something deeper, as though it could see through my soul. I shut my eyes tight, repeating the chant in my head. I don't know how much time passed, a minute, an hour, but then the door slowly closed, as though being pulled back by an invisible hand. A cool breeze swept across my skin, and the feeling of being watched dissipated, not completely, but temporarily. The next morning, I checked the salt circle. A part of it was disturbed, as though someone had intentionally kicked it. The symbols I had drawn with chalk were also smeared, but in the corner of the room, I found a small shard of pottery from the statue, something that should have been sealed in the basement. I took it, wrapped it in red cloth, placed it in a jar of salt, and buried it deep beneath the old tree in my backyard. I don't know if that helped, but at least since that day, I haven't sleepwalked anymore. Even so, I'm still not sure if the ritual worked. Occasionally, I still see a figure standing at the edge of my vision, where the light doesn't reach. I still have moments when time seems to vanish, as though I lose a few minutes in the blink of an eye. And on some nights, I wake up feeling as if something heavy is sitting on my chest. I live, but not normally, and I know one thing for certain. Whatever exists in this house is not easily exorcised. Perhaps it's waiting. Perhaps I've only made it sleep for now. But it hasn't gone. I found the painting one late afternoon in an old antique shop tucked between two abandoned buildings on Riverside Street. The yellowish street light filtered through the dusty glass, casting a glow on the objects inside that seemed to be covered by a mist of fairy tales or nightmares. I wasn't in the habit of wandering into places like that, but on that day, something, an obscure and inexplicable urge, made me walk in. The shopkeeper was an elderly woman, her silver hair tied neatly, her wrinkled face marked with a look of constant vigilance. She didn't greet me, only nodded slightly and continued wiping dust off a cracked mirror. I passed by the scattered relics of the past, a wooden clock that no longer ticked, rotting velvet gloves, empty picture frames, and then I saw it. The painting hung alone on the far wall of the shop, a dark wooden frame, intricately carved with winding vines. Inside was a portrait of a man, seemingly a self-portrait. His face was long and gaunt, his eyes sharp and piercing, as though they were looking straight into the mind of the viewer. But what made my skin crawl wasn't those eyes. It was the background behind the figure, a solid black that seemed to have no depth, as though the man were sitting before an endless abyss. I don't understand why I bought it. Perhaps it was the allure of the strange. Perhaps a part of me was drawn to the painting like a moth to a flame. I only remember, when leaving the shop, my hand gripping the painting's frame, and the shopkeeper standing in the doorway, watching me with a strange expression, a mixture of pity and sadness. I hung the painting in my study on the second floor, where I write, read, and sometimes sketch a few hasty drawings. From the very first night, I felt something was wrong. I couldn't sleep. It wasn't the usual insomnia. My body was exhausted, my eyelids heavy, but my mind was alive, as though an invisible current of electricity was running beneath my skin. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the man from the painting, but this time, he wasn't still. He was smiling, a slow, smirking smile, full of implications, as if he knew something I didn't. Each night, that smile grew closer. It felt like the painting was shifting. No, not the painting. It was him. He was getting closer. After a week of sleepless nights, I began to see other things. Out of the corner of my eye, I would catch movement, but when I turned, nothing was there. Footsteps echoed at night, but every time I checked, the house was empty. I live alone, and have never been afraid of solitude. But now, I wasn't so sure if I was truly alone. The painting began to change. At first, it was the small details. The lines on the man's clothing became more defined, the light on his face sharper, as though the image had been freshly photographed. Then the background, it seemed deeper, as if I were looking into a bottomless well, and something was rising from within it. I tried to put the painting away. I took it off the wall, wrapped it in cloth, and shoved it into the basement. That night I slept, but the next morning, the painting was back on its old stand, unscathed and as pristine as ever. I thought I was sleepwalking. I set up a surveillance camera. The footage showed the study empty throughout the night. No one entered, no movement. But at exactly 3:17 a.m., always 3:17, the video static appeared. Only for 7 seconds. When the image returned, the painting was back in its place. During the static, there was a fleeting frame, a tall, thin figure standing in front of the camera, with eyes that seemed to bore into my heart. I began researching the origin of the painting. In a small local library, I found a clue. The painting belonged to an artist named Alaric Sen, who lived in the late 19th century. He was famous for portraits that were metaphysical. It was rumored he painted souls, not bodies. Some of his customers, after acquiring his paintings, suffered accidents, went insane, or disappeared. Sen vanished without a trace in 1889. His final painting was the one I now owned. I took the painting to an art appraiser. He refused to take it after seeing it, not because of its value, but because he said he had seen this painting in a dream. I began to paint the portrait again, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. At night, I would wake up and find myself sitting in the study, holding a brush, sketching the man's face with dark, reflective-less paint. I don't remember when I started, but each night, the painting became clearer, sharper, as though he was stepping out of the old frame and slowly reappearing in the new painting. And with each time, I saw a death in my dreams. Not my own death, but someone else's. Someone I had never met, but their death was so vivid I could smell the blood, feel the fading warmth of their body. And then, a few days later, I would see their names in the news. Accidents, murders, suicides. I had become something like a gateway. One night, I tried to burn the painting. I took it to the backyard, doused it with gasoline, and set it on fire. But the flames only rose weakly and then went out. The frame remained intact. I threw it into the drain. The next day, it was hanging on the wall again, cleaner and shinier than before. I don't remember hanging it back up. I don't remember what I did that night, but there was black paint on my fingernails and another painting, unfinished, on the easel. I painted my own face. Now I never leave the house. The windows are all sealed. The light hurts my head. I live in darkness, surrounded by the whispers I hear coming from the painting. Alaric calls my name. He tells me I am the next one. That every generation, someone will see the painting, be drawn to it, and become the next hand to paint him, to keep him alive, to prolong the nightmare. I try to lock myself in the storage room, where there is no painting, no brush, but I always wake up with black paint on my hands, with the sound of ancient music echoing in my ears like a summoning ritual. I don't know how much longer I can hold on. If you're reading this, if you see a portrait in an antique shop, with cold eyes and an endless black background, don't look too long. Don't bring it home, and never try to paint it. I used to be a novelist who wrote suspense thrillers, specializing in exploring human fears, from unsolved mysteries to the lurking existence on the boundary between reality and dreams. But I never imagined that my own life would become the most horrifying inspiration for everything I had ever written. It all began one night when I woke up in my small apartment on the 6th floor of an old, dilapidated building, completely unable to remember what I had done in the 4 hours prior. My apartment was usually quiet, so silent that I could hear the ticking of the second hand on the wall clock. But that night, the silence was broken by a whisper faint enough to seem as if it came from beneath the wooden floor. As I strained to listen, my heart began to race, not because I was scared, but because the ticking of the clock began to synchronize with my heartbeat. Each tick-tock rang in perfect rhythm, as though it wasn't measuring time, but my very life. That clock was no ordinary piece. I had bought it from an antique shop as a simple decorative item. The seller was an old man with eyes cloudy like smoky glass. When I pointed at the clock, he said only one thing. Time is the whisper of death. Are you sure you want to hear it? I thought he was just trying to scare me to make the item seem more eerie. I bought it without a second thought. But ever since I hung the clock on the wall, everything began to change. At first, it was small phenomena. I would lose focus, forget what I was doing. Once, I wrote a long passage. Then when I read it again, I had no memory of writing it. The tone was unfamiliar. The word choices seemed like someone else had borrowed my hand to record their own obsession. Those passages often mentioned a faceless man, just a tall figure standing in the darkness of the corner of the room, silently staring at the writer. I started setting up cameras in my office to monitor myself. What I saw on the recordings sent chills down my spine. At exactly 3:33 a.m. every night, I would get out of bed, not turn on the lights, and walk straight into my office. I would sit at the desk. My hands moved as if I were writing, but there was no paper, no pen. On the video, I was just pretending. But when I checked the notebook on the desk, there were scribbled lines in black ink, as if written during a sleepwalk. The words were unclear, fragments of sentences mentioning the door, the silent shadow, and the end point at 3:33. At first, I thought maybe work pressure had caused a sleep disorder, but things got worse the following week, when I began hearing voices whispering behind my ear every evening as dusk approached. The voice was neither clearly male nor female, just a sound like a drawn-out breath, carrying a message as if from another world. Don't turn off the clock. That warning repeated like an order. I started fearing the ticking sound because I knew it was listening to me. Once, I tried removing the clock's battery. In the moment the hand stopped, the entire apartment darkened as if all the light had been sucked away, and I heard a scream coming from the wall, not from anyone's mouth, but from within the structure of the house. That night, when the hour hand struck 3:33, I woke up and felt blood trickling from my ears. It felt as if someone had screamed into my head at a frequency too unbearable, making my brain vibrate as if it were about to explode. I jumped out of bed, struggling to regain control, but my hands and legs trembled, unable to write a single word. In the mirror, I saw my eyes bloodshot, and behind me there was a tall figure, standing silently, faceless. I turned around. No one was there. I took the clock down to the basement to smash it, but it wouldn't break. I used a hammer, stones, even threw it into the fire, but it wouldn't burn, wouldn't melt. The hands kept moving, ticking, and still in sync with my heartbeat. I began losing control. Every night, at exactly 3:33, I would wake up in a sleepwalking state. Once, I found myself standing on the balcony, holding the clock high as if offering it to the night sky. When I woke up, the clock was still in my hand, but there was fresh blood smeared around the edges of the glass. I couldn't go on like this. One night, I decided I had to destroy it at any cost. I placed the clock on the table, poured gasoline over the wooden surface, and lit a match. The flames surged, but in the light of the fire, I saw the glass face of the clock distort, reflecting another room, where I saw myself slumped over the desk, blood flowing from my eyes, nose, and ears. The faceless shadow stood behind me in that reflection, its hand placed on my shoulder like a farewell. When the clock melted, the hour hand stopped at exactly 3:33. Everything around me went dark, not because of a power outage, but because there was nothing left. The sounds disappeared. No wind, no heartbeat. I woke up on the floor. The clock was completely gone, no trace left. But in my ears, I could still hear the ticking, softer, weaker, as if it had fused with me, like I had swallowed it into my heart. Since then, I haven't been haunted by the shadow. No more sleepwalking. No more terrifying 3:33. But I know, I am just the next in line in the chain of those who carry the whisper of death. One day, I too will vanish like some unknown artist who created that clock, and then someone will find it, bring it home, hear the ticking, and begin to listen to the call of the darkness. And so, our story comes to an end. Each object, each strange phenomenon has its own power, forcing people to face fear, confusion, and sometimes helplessness. The inexplicable can bring a sense of comfort, but it can also be a warning from forces unseen, unheard. And then, will you dare to continue searching for the mysteries deep within the darkness? Or will you turn your back and let them haunt you? Thank you for following today's story. If you believe what happened in this video is real, don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. And make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next chilling, mysterious tales from BLACKRIGE stories. Sleep well if you dare.